I really enjoyed the first line of the passage from Isaiah when he said, "For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent until the world sees the vindication of our God. Until her vindication shines out like the dawn and her salvation like a burning torch." As you know, this weekend is a 3-day weekend because of the celebration of the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King was certainly one for whom keeping silent was just not an option. He answered his calling to be a prophet of God, to be one who sought to bring about the fullness of God's kingdom, particularly in addressing the systemic and interpersonal injustices of racism in our country. He also was one of many different approaches of how to do that. His choice was taking the route of Christ and the route of Gandhi of nonviolence. His choice was one of building relationships over ideology, striking common ground and common experiences and common humanity, rather than a differentiation into groups and separation. In other words, he made everybody mad. It's one thing to challenge systems that have the power that do not want change or readaptation or differences of relationships. It's another to risk the life and safety of the group that is not in power to try to bring that bridge about. However, like Gandhi, like Jesus, like Muhammad, like Moses, and many others in history, certainly lots of women that we don't know about, his calling by God was one of saying, I want you to help all my people recognize that our common life is in God, our common dignity is in God, our common identity is in God. All the differences, all the diversities, all the spectra of ways of being human are gifts of God for the people of God in the unity of the oneness of our humanity. Had he kept silent, who knows what would have happened? Had he kept silent about the war in Vietnam, perhaps he would still be alive. We don't know all these answers, but the reality is, even if it meant his death, Dr. King knew that this was what he was meant to do. This was his calling. These were his gifts. This was the inescapable reality of what made him come alive in the world. And as his mentor and one of my favorites, Thurman, said, don't try to figure out what the world needs. Figure out what makes you come alive and then go do it. Because what the world needs are people full of life. How could he possibly have answered his calling if he was not full of life, full of grace, full of hope, full of resignation even? He would not have been able to do it without those things. He also would not have been able to fulfill his calling if it weren't for the beloved community that stood by him, stood with him, marched with him, surrounded him, helped the cause by trying to ensure that all the loose ends that are inevitable in any sort of major change like this were able to be addressed. In other words, it wasn't Martin Luther King Jr. who made the civil rights movement make the strides forward that it did. It was Martin Luther King Jr. and every other person that was there with him. In other words, community. That is the basis for us to build God's kingdom on earth. And that leads to the passage from 1 Corinthians that I very much appreciate, is Paul reminding us that each of us has different gifts. A couple chapters away, he talks about the idea of likening us to the body of Christ, and each of us is a member of that body. Now, if you are eyes, you have important roles. You look around, you see where you're going. Anyone who stubbed their toe in the dark can testify to the importance of eyes. And if people who are blind, their other senses are accentuated and heightened. If you are ears, you can hear things coming and look around. If you are a hand, can you see? Sort of. You can touch things, you can feel things, you can make your way through. But the job of hands isn't primarily to see, it's to do all kinds of other odds and ends. But if your hands need to do work and you have to get across the room or several miles down the road, can you get there without the feet? Other ways of doing it, yes, if you don't have feet. But if you have feet, they are necessary for walking you to that place. But can the feet, again, back to the analogy of eyes, see very well in the dark to be able to avoid that corner table that always catches your pinky toe? No, you need those things. Even things like the edge of your elbow, somewhat of a protection. It's part of your body. It's necessary. How can you live without your heartbeat? Who here can live without a heart? Only was it the Tin Man? Or was it the Lion? Yeah, Tin Man. But he was looking for one. But anyway. The heart beats life literally into every organ of our bodies. And of course, the head is Christ. So for us, our question this week, especially after last week where we remembered focusing on the good things in life, looking at what is good in the world, recognizing those moments of epiphany, those moments of, aha, eureka, I have found it. Oh my goodness, I had no idea. This is a whole new world to me. Those are great, but if you go, okay, cool, back to the way I was, the epiphany isn't much of an epiphany. It's the practice, it's the engagement, it's the living into these things that we've learned that is so important. So the question is, what makes you come alive? Like, what really makes you feel the most alive in life? Both in your everyday life, in your everyday work, but also, in this case, what is the part of St. Anne's that you feel like you are most alive when you are participating in? What part of the body of St. Anne's are you? One of the things we're going to address in the annual meeting is trying to find ways to make sure that everyone has a part to play in this body, even if it's remote. Whatever that means for you, you will find it as you go. But what can you do? What are you doing? What are you giving to St. Anne's and receiving from St. Anne's that makes you so alive that you cannot keep silent? You cannot hold it in. You're going to burst forward with excitement and sharing that good news in the world, and that your participation in what makes you come alive injects so much more life into St. Anne's. Even with Omicron rampaging right now, even with the frustration, the resignation, the anger and anxiety that we feel that we're still dealing with this, that we're still having so many of our loved ones and friends coming down with it, we're making our way into this new normal in a way that is, I think, finally taking some root. And it's in that new normal, in that new church that is still very much the old church, but in a new way that we're stepping into, gives us the exciting opportunities to really ask, what would make me come alive? What makes St. Anne's the most vital, the most vibrant? And what good news does that bring out to the world such that we cannot keep ourselves silent for bursting with excitement for what we have to offer, what God is doing with us, how God is fulfilling our lives through our callings. So my hope and prayer is that we recognize that each of us is uniquely called. Each of us is uniquely necessary. And each of us is part of a community. And each of us have good news to share with the world. And to implement the ways of being that embody that good news, even without words. So may you take some time and dive more deeply into what makes you come alive at St. Anne's. What are you doing already that's great? What are ways that you can contribute that don't tax you and don't cost you everything, but can give even more to the vitality of this new iteration, this new opportunity that we are now slowly baby stepping our way into as we go. Amen.